If you like listening to Warriors in Their Own Words, check out our other show, the Medal of Honor podcast. The link is in the show description. I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. In partnership with the Honor Project, we've brought this podcast back at a time when our nation needs these stories more than ever. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for listening, and by doing so, honoring those who have served. Today, we'll hear from Chief Machinist Mate Jerry Markham. Markham served as a Navy Seabee during World War II and was tasked with destroying German obstacles that could have prevented a successful beach landing on D-Day.
Well, it was back in about 1943. The war had been in progress for quite some time at that point. And I was in a job in a large paper company that was exempt from the draft. I had no concern about that, so I had to volunteer for the service. I was about 24 years old at the time. And I'd always been interested in deep-sea diving. And the Navy, as a boy, used to go down and watch the Navy ships come in New Orleans, where I was raised as a youngster. And I was always interested in deep-sea diving. So I thought I'd join the Seabees, get into the diving school, and make my contribution to the war effort. So I volunteered for the Seabees in 1943, was inducted in the service, went to Camp Perry, Virginia, which was a big Seabees training base. And after the induction training, I was assigned to a water purification school, which meant I would have been on an island somewhere chlorinating drinking water. That was not my idea of a glamorous deep-sea diving experience. So about that time, the requests for volunteers come along for the Naval Combat Demolition Units. They said extremely dangerous and hazardous work, must be physically fit, able to swim strong, handle small boats, etc. So I volunteered for that from the Seabees, along with about 90 other Seabees. It sounded exciting the way it was put up. I don't think any of us were concerned about the dangerous and hazardous missions. We considered all war effort to be dangerous and hazardous missions. We didn't realize how really dangerous and hazardous it was until after we got into it and got trained very well. But the swimming and small boat handling appealed to me as far as the volunteer notice was concerned. And the actual training, we did some salvage diving, shallow water diving gear, and we did all kinds of things, hand-to-hand combat, obstacle courses, close order drills. The Marine Raiders had us for the first 6 weeks of this volunteer, separating the men from the boys. And it was quite an experience. I think we had 30 volunteers left at the end of that 3-week knockdown grilling we had from the Marine Raider training. We didn't have sophisticated explosives like plastics and things of that type. We were using the old dynamite and TNT, which were very dangerous to handle. And this was what we understood to be the dangerous part. We would be handling these explosives in surf conditions, under duress conditions. And so we were extra trained in this. Safety was the key word. Anybody who was careless was dropped out of the outfit immediately in handling any of these kind of explosives or anything else like that. That we didn't visualize going up on a beach and being shot at. We thought we were going to go in and do maybe reconnaissance work and then go in and clear out obstacles and so forth in preparation for the main invasion forces, which is what we were being trained for. That we thought was the danger part of it. The idea of forming the Navy Demolition Units to begin with. Started with an experience in the Pacific. There was a famous invasion out there of an island called Charwan, where all the Marines were slaughtered because they couldn't get ashore. They were stranded on a reef. And the Navy, who conducted the invasion forces, did not have the intelligence, did not have the reconnaissance, did not know about that reef, did not know that their landing craft couldn't get across to the beach. So these Marines were exposed. They had to wade 200 or 300 yards through this reef to get to the shore. So that experience said to the Navy, we have got to have reconnaissance. We got to have intelligence, Arnie. Well, anyway, this experience the Navy had out in the Pacific and trying to land on this island with Charwa brought attention to the Navy that they had to do a job of getting intelligence, advanced intelligence of possible invasion sites. They could never expose the invasion forces to such open gunfire as position as that. They had to have a group that could go in and make the reconnaissance and at the same time identify the obstacles and the mines and the reefs and blow a path through them so the invasion forces could be conducted safely. Therefore, Naval Combat Demolition Units were created out of that need. A forerunner to that was when they contemplated and got ready to invade Africa, North Africa, they picked 13 men from the Seabees who were in the mine disposal, dynamite, and construction units because they were mature, experienced men in handling explosives. They gave them a special training program of how to cut a submarine net that was across a channel into a harbor that they had to get into to knock out an airfield in order to conduct an invasion with some safety. These men were sent to Africa, North Africa. It was off the French coast of Morocco. And they went in the channel the first night and they got caught, so they had to back out and get out of there. And they went in 2 nights later and they made it. And they blew that net out of there. Now, one of the men was a fellow by the name of Freeman, who was also in the invasion of Normandy with me. So he's been around a long time. Now, these men were brought back, and they got 13 Seabees then and trained them for naval combat demolition work for the invasion of Italy, Sicily. They went to Sicily, and fortunately, they had no reconnaissance to do and no demolition work to do on the beaches, but they did go inland and do a lot of work in blowing down tank traps and things like that. So they proved their value in that sense. Then Admiral King of the North Atlantic Forces issued an order. He wanted a formal organization of naval combat demolition units. Therefore, he appointed a man by the name, a lieutenant commander by the name of Kaufman, who is now known as the father of the SEALs, to organize and train these men. Kaufman picked the first men was from Camp Perry, Virginia, and I was one of the first guys that went into his group. And we took the other men that he'd used in Italy and in Africa were sent to Fort Pierce, Florida as instructors and to help build a base down there So when we finished our first induction training at Camp Perry, Virginia, we went to Fort Pierce, Florida and helped finish building the base. And I would say that of 192 men that made up the Naval Combat Demolition Units at Omaha Beachhead, 80% of them were former volunteers from the Seabees. Former Seabees had volunteered for it. And about the same ratio at the Utah group. The original concept of taking Seabees was because they were mature, because they had experience in construction, they had experience with explosives, rather than taking a raw 17, 18-year-old Navy seaman and training him how to spell rat and cat, as well as blow up They picked men that were seasoned, experienced. And they picked men who knew the meaning of dangerous and hazardous duty. from the Seabees. Utah beachhead, which was part of the Normandy invasion, was relatively safe. We had less than 10% casualties in our group there. In Omaha, we had over 52% casualties. So it was very devastating at Omaha beachhead because of a lot of foul-ups in the terrain and the contrast of the beach and so forth and so on. Give you an illustration. The Omaha beachhead was over 300 yards wide at mean low tide. It had a 27-foot tide. It changed about every 6 hours. It came in a foot every 8 minutes when it started running in. They had bands of obstacles, mined obstacles, at different tide levels to catch the incoming landing craft to stop them from beaching. Now, a 300-yard beach with 8 bands of mined obstacles would catch them at any tide level. Even with a 4-foot draft, they couldn't escape hitting an obstacle. Our job was to blow a 50-yard path from the tide low level, all the way to the high water mark through those mined obstacles and put buoys there so that the landing craft coming behind us could navigate through those paths and those buoys. Now you think about it, we were exposed now to enemy gunfire from HR on till we got to the high water mark. So that was pretty damn dangerous. And that was, as I read later, that General Bradley, who was in charge of the Normandy military forces, was just getting ready to call off the Omaha beach sector, diverted down to Sword Beach, which was a British beach that had been established east of us. When 4 destroyers come in and laid their keels on the bottom to get in as close, and fired at a low level into these gun positions, into the low level that the heavy guns couldn't get to, and knocked them out. And that enabled the engineers and infantry to get off the beach, to get into those ravines and get up above and knock out those guns that were just wiping us out on the beach. So the little destroyers did the job for us there that day. There was such strong security on our organization that when we first shipped out in December of 43 to England, there were 11 units of us. The units comprised of 6 men, 1 officer and 5 men. That was known as a Naval Combat Demolition Unit. Compact men trained where one man could do the whole job if necessary. Very glamorous, free de corps. When we got to England, they didn't know who we were. The security was so great. We went into an amphibious base in Plymouth, England, and they putting on guard duty at ammunition dumps because of our name, Naval Combat Demolition. Then finally, after a few weeks of this, the word come down to who we were, and we were assigned part of an amphibious base to do our own training and organizing for the preparation. Punchline, about 2 months prior to D-Day, we were finally made privy to the intelligence reports of the various sections of the Normandy coastline that might be available or used for invasion purposes. We then saw what we were confronted with, these mean low tides, 300-yard beaches, mined obstacles, all of these things. And we recognized and we knew immediately we were seriously undermanned. 6 men could not, in the time allotted, blow a 50-yard path through any of those. So we then began to combine our strength with the combat engineers, Army engineers. We got some more manpower. We increased. We had 5 combat engineers, Army engineers, assigned to each of our units, and we had 3 additional Navy men volunteered to come out of Scotland. So we wound up with a 14-man unit, and the Army put together a 26-man combat group, and we all went in as a combat team to start at this base to blow that path. And that's how we were manned. Now, we were carrying specially designed explosive packs that we call the Hagerson pack, a little sausage-shaped thing about 13, 14 inches long, filled with plastic explosive with a primer cord through it with a loop on the end to where we could fasten it on an obstacle or on a beam or what have you and just tie it together. And then my job, my officer's job, was to carry a reel of primer cord and carry the detonators. And we would go behind the men as they would tie these charges and tie them into this long line, this reel, because this primer cord would fire it at the rate of 22,000 feet a second. Now, that's pretty fast. So you didn't have any false detonations on that. And the thing about it is it was absolutely, you could fire a gun right into it and it wouldn't detonate it. It took a special cap to do it. So it was very safe to use. But that was what we were carrying with us. The Germans had built a thing called Belgium Gate. It was about 10, 12 feet wide. It was about 8 feet high. And it had steel beams facing it like this. And the face of the gate come up with mines on each, in the middle and on each end of it. And then the back of it was A-frame supported like this to keep it upright, facing the ocean like that. And it was built on rollers so that Germans could move it around in different places on the beach, which they had damn little success in doing, because once you'd settle into that wet sandy, they weren't going to move. But this steel Belgium gate created a hazard itself, in addition to its purpose, was to put high explosives on that. You would create one hell of a hand grenade, flying steel everywhere. So that's where our ingenious little sausage plastic Hagerson pack, we would place that at the different joints of this thing and then blow it, and it would just flatten it out and it would fall right flat down. It didn't spew all over the place because we only had about 2 pounds of tetratol in those little packs. The others were wooden ramps. Like a log goes up like this with it, like that, and the boat would slide up that, and the mine was on the top of it. Then you had the tetrahedrons. That's a big concrete block with steel beams sticking out like this, which would snare in the bottom of any landing craft. Tetrahedrons, they call them. And those were not mined because, but the log ramps were mined and the Belgium gates were mined. And some of the tetrahedrons were mined. Most of the mines were cellar mines and explode on contact, those kind of mines. In our landing craft, we had a rubber boat filled with extra explosives. We couldn't possibly physically carry enough explosives to load all of those obstacles. So we carried extra explosives in the rubber boat, which we launched when we hit the beach. That proved to be disastrous because many of the mortars hit those rubber boats and killed a lot of men and demolished the explosives with it. That's what happened to my boat with rubber explosives. And my officer got killed at the same time when that mortar hit that rubber boat with the explosives on it. So we kind of went in with a tide, and they had a strong cross current. And part of the units on the left and the right of me began to drift into each other. And they were all pretty badly shot up. So we blew a partial gap with what explosives we had. And then we were spending most of my time, half of my people were done. We were getting the wounded men, carrying them with us as far as we progressed up this beach. And we had to hide behind these mine obstacles for protection from the crossfire machine gun fire. And more explosives would come by from the team on the right of us. His rubber boat drifted over, and we got some explosives out of that. And that's how we got some additional explosives. But that was pretty much, it took us about, what we were supposed to do in 30 minutes took us 4 hours to get to the high water mark that day. We were in the water, but not any deep water. We were coming in with the tide. Remember, the water was coming in a foot every 8 minutes. So we landed at 6:33. So 8 minutes later, there was a foot of water there. 8 minutes later, there was another foot of water there. And we had to move with the water. And the water was pretty cold that day. I understood it was 58 degrees, and that created a lot of hazards for the wounded, but, with shock and so forth and so on. But our uniform was Army fatigues and regular GI shoes and helmets and a garrison belt. And I wore long winter underwear because it was cold. And we didn't carry a weapon because what the hell would you do with it? You could carry a weapon. So we were our job was to pass through these obstacles, not to swim. There was no swimming involved. We didn't do any swimming at all over in Europe, except for where we fell overboard, maybe. When the landing craft dropped its ramp on the beach, it was at the foot of the first bend of obstacles. Prior to dropping that ramp, we could feel the machine gun bullets, could see them hitting the water and splattering across the bow of the landing craft. So we knew we were under small arms machine gun fire. I saw a couple of landing craft get hit with mortars and just blew them right out of the water and killed most of the people who were in it. And when our ship hit the ramp, we dropped the ramp, the first group out was the Army engineers with their rubber boat, which they all portage out into the sand and then off to the side and let the tide bring it in. And by this time, half of them were getting shot all to pieces. We followed them and we pulled our rubber boat out to the left side and put it down. And some of my men went ahead, and I turned around and looked, and the mortar had hit. My officer was standing by the rubber boat when the mortar hit at him and one of the seamen. And they were just obliterated with the explosions. There must have been 500 pounds of assorted explosions in that rubber boat. So it was my job to take command because that's what I'd been trained to do as a second in command. I was the chief at that time. But regardless, it could have been a second-class petty officer. If I'd have been number 2 in the unit, I'd have taken charge. But taking charge doesn't mean that I want to stand up and start directing people. We'd all been trained to do a job, and everybody knew his job. And all I was to do was to utilize what men I had left to do as much as I could in loading these obstacles and blowing them, get them the hell out of the way. And I had the detonators and the reel of primary card to detonate them with. So I was very essential. My officer had the other reel, so he was gone.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Level up with Gourmet Plus options, prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Looking for calorie-conscious options? Try delicious, dietitian-approved, calorie-smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. Need an extra boost to support your wellness goals and feel your best as you tackle a busy autumn? Try Protein Plus meals with 30 grams of protein or more per serving. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This September, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door. Ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
Step back in time and discover the untold stories of history's greatest heroes. From ancient civilizations to modern times, the Anthology of Heroes podcast takes you on a journey through history, uncovering the bravery and determination of those who stood up for what they believed in. These aren't just stories from old history books, they're the human experiences of those who fought for justice, freedom, and their principles. From the defiance of Vercingetorix as he stood against Rome to the unwavering spirit of Skanderbeg as he faced down the Ottoman Empire, each episode is a journey through their life as we follow their triumphs and their failures. Meticulously researched with quotes and observations from primary sources, Anthology of Heroes is the perfect blend of expert research and engaging storytelling. So listen and subscribe now on your favorite podcasting app.
They didn't have time to be afraid. The chaos around you, the fury of what was you were into was, you had no place to hide. You couldn't take a taxi home. You couldn't go back out to sea. The only place you could go was forward, and you had a job to do. And you knew damn good and well if you didn't do that job, there were a hell of a lot of people wasn't going to get off of that beach or get on that beach. So that's the way we'd been trained to do our jobs, and that's what we did the best we could. We got a presidential unit citation for it, and there were 8 Navy Crosses and 12 Silver Stars, about 60 Purple Hearts. We blew 8 gaps and 3 partial gaps through 16 possible gaps. We had 52% casualties. And with the help of 4 destroyers, the mission was successful. I didn't realize I'd been in several explosions that day, D-Day, around some major explosions. So by D-Day plus 3, I began to pass blood. I had a case of the GIs from eating out of greasy mess kits for those nights on that slippery, wet deck. And the doctors later told me to probably save my life to stop from having concussion, internal concussion from the explosions. So I was passing this blood with the GIs. And it got pretty bad about the 3rd day. We finished mopping up the beach. We cleaned everything up. I went out to a hospital ship that had been beached LSTs to get some chalky substance to stop this. And they slapped my can in the bed, and they wouldn't let me go back ashore because I'd lost a lot of blood, So anyway, I wound up 2 weeks later back at my old base in England because they ran me out of the hospital because I recovered very quickly, and I was trying to date the nurses and drink up all their scotch. And they wouldn't let me donate blood because they give you a big double of scotch if you donate a blood, They said, "You bastards, you haven't got enough blood now. Get out of here." What happened on the Omaha beachhead the morning of D-Day, in my mind, was never comprehended that anything like that could happen. I could visualize machine gun fire and mortar fire, but never with such intensity, never with such thoroughness. Every inch of that beach was zeroed in. And as I said before, if all of the preparations had been successful prior to actual beach landing, this would have been greatly minimized, but not completely eliminated, because the Germans had cliffs dug into those, had caves dug into those cliffs and gun placements. One German could fire 4 machine guns at one time, and they were using wooden projectiles, wooden bullets, because they didn't run out of metal. And these were anti-personnel weapons. And every one of them was zeroed in on different sections of the beach. All he had to do was look at a chart and push a button. And that gun would move here and move there and move there, wherever he wanted to move it. That's how much time they had to prepare for the defense of that beachhead. So your question about how do you grasp something like that, it's obviously disproven you. I can't grasp it because I keep going back to the details, which is I couldn't comprehend that would ever be that way. As I've said before, I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience. I wouldn't give you a nickel for any more of it. It's, I don't know how to grasp that one. I think the best moment I had was I was able to save 3 men's lives. They'd been buried in a mortar cave-in. And I went out and dug their heads out of that. It was soft sand, fortunately. And finally, they wiggled them out of there. They had been in a foxhole with a high bank and a mortar hit behind and just caved it in on top of them. And I happened to be laying over to the side when I saw it, and I just jumped up and went over and started digging their heads out so they could breathe. And when they got out, I felt very satisfied with myself. At least I'd done something constructive that day. In the heat of stress and battle, and you see your friends being shot to pieces and so forth, you're disturbed, there's no question about it. But you've got two fears: the fear of becoming a victim like they did, and the fear of not doing your job that you were supposed to do. And that's a very individual thing, those two fears. Who's going to win? And I think the training we had, the physical disciplinary training we had, the stress and so forth and on, paid off. I don't recall anyone shirking his duty, anyone there wasn't any place to hide anyway. But I never saw anyone that didn't get up and do everything he could possibly do. Let me give you an illustration about how physically fit these men were. We laid in the English Channel on the English side for 3 days and nights on a steel deck, sleeping on a steel deck, eating cold rations in rainy weather. We made a false attempt on June 5th and had to go back into the channel and redock and come out again the next night. We crossed the channel on an LCT, that's a tank carrier, a flat-bottom tank carrier. It goes about 5 knots an hour. The damn thing sunk 2 miles off of the coast of France. We had to pull a landing craft in and unload the crew off of that and take the crew we had 3 tanks on this thing. Take the crew over, put them on a transport ship and get back in line and make our invasion site. Half of the men were green with seasickness. Now, can you imagine 3 days and nights of that? And if you weren't physically fit, brother, you wasn't going to make it. I think that illustrates how strong and fit they were and how dedicated these men were. Let me explain something, too, about the volunteers. You volunteered to get in. You had to prove yourself to stay in. You could get out any time you wanted to. All you had to say was uncle, and they sent you to the transfer pool. At the end of the Hell's Week, the final knockdown training, if you passed, you were in. The officers got together in a group, the other men got together in another group. The officers picked their second in command. They then went to that man. This was an enlisted man. There's only 5 men and an officer in the first units. He then went to this first man and said, I've picked you. Do you want to serve with me as my second man? The man had the option of saying no and going back in the pool if he didn't like the officer. The officers took the same training with us, shoulder to shoulder, so there's no question about knowing who he was or what he could do. If the guy said yes, then him and the second in command went to 4 more men and gave them the same option. So when that unit was finalized, it was 6 guys together because they wanted to be together. The other thing was that these men always trained in a buddy system, always 2 together. We never lost 1 man in the whole history of the organization from drowning. Never. Because there was always a buddy system. And if one guy got wounded or something, his buddy was there to help him. And that was the way that was put together. And after the Normandy thing, what was left of us? We come back to the States. They disbanded the units. They then went to underwater demolition teams because there were 100-man teams. At that point in time, these men had the option of going anywhere in the Navy they wanted to go. They go back in the Seabees, and some of them went back in the Seabees. 2 of my men went back in the Seabees that were in my unit that survived. After what was left of us come back to the States, we disbanded the units and folded the men who wanted to go into newly formed teams or all existing teams. The teams were called UDTs, Underwater Demolition Teams. They're comprised of 100 men, and they were autonomous. They had 4 combat platoons. They had a ship's company. They had their own motor max. They had their own cameramen. They had their own medics. They had their own destroyer assigned to them. They were very autonomous. They had come of age, so to speak. Say, now, I put together a team with my top commanding officer in Omaha, a fellow by the name of Walter Cooper. And we put together a team 25. And I was a senior chief in that team. Of course, I got mixed feelings about the whole concept of war. but at that particular time, what was left of us were pretty damn proud of the job we'd done. And we didn't think any of it was in vain, even though it's for those that lost their lives. I grieved for those men. A lot of them were young boys, and it was teens, 18, 19 years old. That was the curse of being a mature man at 24 at that time. But I didn't think it was in vain. Question came, would you do it again if you knew you were facing the same conditions? And my classical answer is no, because we would first eliminate those conditions. This was the attitude, the spirit in which our people were trained and functioned in. We took no unnecessary risks. We took risks, but we didn't take stupid or foolish ones. If all the plans had been carried out on the Omaha beachhead that had been planned, if the bombs had not had 32 delayed fuses on them and hit behind the beach instead of on the beach, if the Navy heavy guns had not bounced off of the heavy gun placements, convex concrete, if the thousands of rockets that were fired into that beachhead had done the job of clearing out those mines and those booby traps and machine gun nests, we would have had a nice, easy job of doing our job. But none of this was helpful. That's why those 4 destroyers saved the day. They come in and open up one of those exits from the beach, and when our men got off of that beach, they got behind the Germans and they knocked the living hell out of them. That's how we got off of that beach. As I told you, I come back and help form a new team, underwater demolition team. And I was successful in getting 33 of the men from Omaha to join me in that new team. And we were out in the Pacific. We were out at the training base was out in Maui. And we were off the coast of California. There were 17 destroyers laying off the coast, 17 underwater demolition teams, all there for the purpose of cold water training and preparation for the invasion of Japan proper. Now, being a senior chief in my team, I was privy to the intelligence, much more than I had been in Europe. And I knew that the invasion of Japan proper would have been worse than Omaha. Because, number one, we were invading a homeland, not an occupied country. They would have fought us with broomsticks, those people. Number two, most important, we would not have had air control. We could never have had complete air control. Number three, we could never swipe out all the mines that the Japs had placed on different parts of their coast. All kinds of sophisticated mines that we couldn't have gotten through. So when they dropped the A-bomb and the Japs surrendered for peace, I went to Cooper, my commanding officer. I said, I want you to shake hands with number one. He says, number one what? American citizen. I'm getting the hell out of this outfit. I said, you take these kids and go to Japan. And they took the team and they went to Japan. They put the occupation forces right on the same logistics that we used for the invasion purposes. And I went home. I'm very proud, as I obviously demonstrate, to have been a part of that organization. I've never in my lifetime found such compatibility and esprit de corps with a group of people or men as I did in that organization. And in my civilian life, I've had some pretty top executive jobs. I was the president of a company one time and vice president of several other companies, so I know about the line of chain of command and so forth and so on. But that was the greatest pride I had in the military, was that esprit de corps, those men. When we looked at one another, we knew why you were there and why you could stay there if you wanted to be there. There's no question in your mind about it. It had nothing to do with your personal life. It was just what you were doing together at that time. If it was part of the function, the mission, whatever it was, they didn't hesitate in face of danger to do their jobs, to help you or help take a sacrifice, whatever. I don't think they deliberately took sacrifice. Everybody felt optimistic about his abilities. But there were never any backing down. Never.
That was Chief Machinist Mate Jerry Markham. Thanks for listening to Warriors in Their Own Words. If you have any feedback, please email the team at kharbaugh@evergreenpodcasts.com. We're always looking to improve the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review. Warriors in Their Own Words is a production of Evergreen Podcasts in partnership with the Honor Project. Our producer is Declan Roars. Bridget Coyne is our production director, and Sean Rule-Hoffman is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Evergreen executive producers Joan Andrews, Michael DeAloya, and David Moss. I'm Ken Harbaugh, and this is Warriors in Their Own Words.
Greetings from Evergreen Podcasts. We're rolling out a listener survey, and we want to hear from you. The information in the survey will help us gather statistics and in turn make our shows more appealing to advertisers. I know most people don't like ads, but this is one of the only ways our shows make money and help keep their lights on. We promise it will only take a few minutes, but the impact on our podcasts will be tremendous. As a token of our appreciation, we'll randomly select one lucky participant each month to win an exclusive merchandise package from Evergreen Podcasts. Head to evergreenpodcast.com/listenersurvey to help a show and possibly get some free stuff for doing so. We can't thank you enough for the support. Now back to the show.